Hey, good evening, and sorry about the lighting. I'm sitting in my backyard. I just finished watching an MSNBC panel just explode, blaming the Republicans and blaming the Democrats, and blame, the blame game. It's everybody. It's that group's fault. It's this group's fault. That's why you should vote for us. It's that group's fault. Why you should vote for us. You know, the thing is, it's all of our faults, and we need to be aware of that. If we're going to fix our country, if we're going to stop this division in our country, there's a way to do it. And I'm going to tell you that way tonight. I'm going to give you just a taste of some of the constitutional classes I teach as a hobby, because I like educating people and giving them information. The information I'm going to give you, you can accept it or you can reject it. The choice is yours. I'm not here to twist anyone's arm and make them believe anything they don't already believe. But I'm going to give you some information, and all I'm going to tell you is the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. You know, I served in the United States Armed Forces under Ronald Reagan. And during that time, I got to travel the globe. And I've been to dozens of different countries. And the one thing I noticed, no matter what country I went to, all people had the same aspirations, the same desires in life. They wanted to live a comfortable life. They wanted to be left alone. And they wanted to see their children do better than they did and live a happy life. They wanted happiness. That was the key element in every country I went to around the globe. But also in every country I went to around the globe, I'll tell you a little secret. I noticed one thing, one characteristic that just stuck out to me. Every government around the globe rewarded their friends and punished their enemies. Virtually every place I went, and there may be some that exist that aren't like this, but of the dozens of countries I visited, every one of them initiated force to transfer wealth. This is inherently the flaw of the human condition. This is inherently the flaw of government. None of us are perfect, and all of us have emotions, and all of us live off those emotions on a daily basis. But we have to come to reality with the terms that what we're doing is wrong when we base all our decisions off of emotions constantly. You know, the problems we face in this country are not new. The problems we're facing right now in the United States of America have been going on for almost 2,500 years. You know, when you travel overseas and you see some of these places and see some of these things that happens to people, some of the tyranny, some of the atrocities, the initiation of force, destroying families, destroying men, women, and children. It's sickening. It truly is sickening. But you know, this all started many centuries ago, even before the birth of Christ. The tax system we use today, the tax system that's used around the globe today, is a 2,500-year-old tax system. Because back then, people didn't have computers. They didn't have the communication age. So the governments were forced, in order to stay viable, to go around and threaten people in order to get them to pay. You know, this is a modern society. We don't have to do this anymore. And the problems we're facing, even in the political campaigns today, are because we initiate force against people to collect taxes. That's the whole problem. You know, I've asked people, and I even sent out a message when I ran for office trying to get people. I supported the non-aggression principle. I supported living in a symbiotic society and trying to form conditions, create conditions where we could all thrive, where we could all succeed, where we could all live happily and do better in life. But nobody, I was rejected wholeheartedly because I didn't want to get out there and slander my opponents. I didn't want to get out there and beat people down, because you're never going to accomplish anything in life beating people down. You lose respect, you lose admiration, and eventually you're going to lose office. But to make a long story short, let's get back on the topic of when this all began. Approximately 400 to 500 years before the birth of Christ, in Athens, Greece, some intellectuals started looking around, and they looked at Athens, where only a few people had a good standard of living, and the majority lived in poverty. They looked over it, and they were a democracy. They looked over at Sparta, where the majority lived in poverty, and a few had a decent standard of living. They were an oligarchy, run by the rich. Then they looked over at the Persian Empire across the sea. And again, the majority lived in poverty, and a few people had a good standard of living. And they started talking about, why is that? Why is it? And what they noticed was the same thing. It didn't matter if it was a democratic society. It didn't matter if it was a society run as an oligarchy by the rich. It didn't matter if it was a dictatorship. What they noticed was that each one of those groups controlled the wealth, and they rewarded their friends and they punished their enemies. And that's just the truth. That's just the truth of the matter. It doesn't matter what party you belong to. If you vote people into office that are going to pass laws under our current tax code to increase taxes on people and initiate force against them, you are part of the problem dividing this country. You're part of the problem. So how do we solve the problem? It's easy enough to state that's the problem, isn't it? How do we solve it? It's pretty simple. We have to go to a voluntary tax system where people can't initiate force against their fellow man to transfer wealth. It's just that simple. A lot of people are going to say, well, how in the heck do you have a voluntary tax system? It's pretty simple. We do it in a majority of our states right now, and we have for decades. It's called a sales tax. We need to abolish the IRS, and we need to move to a national sales tax, and the states need to abolish their property taxes and move to a state sales tax. And most people are going to say, well, no, that'll never work in a million years. But it's already working. It's already a proven system. That's the beauty of it. We don't have to expect it not to work because we know it already works. Now, a lot of people are going to stand against us and say, well, that punishes the poor, which is not true at all. It rewards the poor, as a matter of fact. It rewards everyone. You know, there's this big myth going around that if you can tax the companies, then that'll make your life a little bit better because you'll get the government to give you some of that money. But the truth is, these companies run a budget, and these companies have overhead, and those taxes are applied into that overhead. So when you buy a product at the checkout counter, you're paying those taxes. The government's just giving you back the money, or not even all of it, just part of the money that you paid in taxes. And they're fleecing you doing it because they talked you into taxing the corporations. Oh, but wait, the corporations say, well, we don't want to be taxed. We want subsidies. So if they get subsidies, where do they get the money? They tax the middle class and the poor, right? And then what happens to the middle class and the poor? They can't buy the products. And so what happens to the companies? Then the companies have to cut back on their product sales, and they lay people off, or they cut wages. You know, it takes 3 things to make a product, ladies and gentlemen. And all your economic people around the globe will agree with this. It takes energy, it takes material, and it takes labor. And in order to be competitive, you need to drop any one of those 3 prices. Well, since the government of the people, by the people, for the people that we put in power doesn't want to drop taxes on energy, they don't want to drop taxes on materials, right? Well, guess what's going? The labor. That's why none of you have had a raise in almost a decade, not a decent raise. It hasn't kept up with the cost of inflation. That's why your standard of living is declining, and it's going to continue to decline. And if we raise taxes again, your standard of living, and not just the poor, and not just the middle class, and not just the rich, everyone's standard of living will just take another bite in the notch. It'll decline just a little bit more. Well, you know, this is the truth. This is the truth about what's happening. And the thing is, we know a system that works. It's called a representative constitutional republic. There's a reason there's a Bill of Rights. I'll ask you guys a question. I'll give you a moment to answer in your own mind. How many of you out there believe you have constitutional rights? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You don't have any constitutional rights. You have inalienable rights. They were given to you by God or nature, whichever you choose to believe. Okay? Everyone has a right to life. Everyone has a right to happiness. These cannot be denied, or shouldn't be denied. They are being denied, but they shouldn't be. You know, the Constitution wasn't written to give you rights. The Constitution was written to stop mobs of citizens from bringing harm to other mobs of citizens based on financial reasons, based on religious reasons, and, you know, basically based on jealousy and greed, and all the nasty things that we have in the human condition. It was to try to control us, to keep us from harming ourselves. But it didn't do a very good job, did it? Because it worked great until we decided to drop it out of the education system in our country. It worked great. But you know, we're getting back to that today. In some terms. We teach in school bullying's not cool, isn't it? We teach our children bullying is bad. Don't be bullying other kids. They get in trouble for it, don't they? Then when they grow up, we teach them to join a political party and to vote for a candidate that's going to bully other people, that's going to seize their property. And if you don't pay, we're going to seize your bank accounts. And if you pull all your money out of the bank, we're going to come seize your property. And if you resist, we'll put you in prison. And heaven forbid if you resist 110%, because they will shoot you in the head to take your property. And that's our tax system. It's a barbaric tax system. It needs to be abolished. It needs to be wiped away from this planet, never to return again. We have to break the cycle of a republic transforming into a democracy, into a socialist society, into a communist society, into a dictatorship, and into and then back to an oligarchy, and then back to a republic. And sometimes they don't necessarily go in that order. You can look throughout history, the orders change, but they always change, and they always eventually wind up back to a republic. And then they always dissipate and fall apart again, and it's because of our mandatory transfer of wealth. Because we think that we're entitled to someone else's time, to someone else's labor, and to someone else's material property. You know, there were another group of citizens in the U.S. that believed that at one time. It was the slave owners during the 1800s. They believed that they were entitled to own your time and your labor and your property. Oh, but they provided houses, and they provided food, and they provided clothes for you to put on your back. They did all the things the government does for you today. You might want to think about that. Just some words of hope for people out there. And I hope we can all learn to get along, and I hope we can come to some rational decision-making processes to solve these problems. But increased taxation is not going to help us. Increasing those subsidies is not going to help us. We are destroying our middle class. And once it's gone, and it's very hard to get back. In fact, it usually doesn't come back unless there's a revolution. So, just some words of hope. I hope everyone can see where my message is and see where I'm coming from on these details. Hopefully people will get this message and some things will start to change. If not, I've lived through it once. I'll survive it again. God bless you, and I hope you do. God bless. Good night.